Welcome to the Critical Information Conference here at the School of Visual Arts. My name is Rabia, and I am a second-year student here at the MFA program, Art Criticism and Writing. I'm going to be moderating this panel, which is in Communication, Isolation, and Retaliation, or Responses to the Age of Information. Lucy Raven is the faculty respondent for this panel. Lucy is an artist, writer, and editor currently based in New York. And she primarily works with animation and the moving image, and currently teaches a class here on motion capture. We're very lucky to have you here. As for the panel itself, the way that we sort of formed the panel was after reviewing all the really, really amazing abstracts that we got. We were trying to find connections between I was personally trying to find connections between what art is doing in the larger social political context, as well as looking at other art-related programs and how they're dealing with the same social political atmosphere.
Yeah, my name's John Ryan. I recently, as in last May, graduated from Art Center College of Design's Media Design Practices program. And today I'm going to be presenting my research and a kind of a surrounding body of work from the last year of this, my thesis year, which is a little bit of a mouthful, Declarations of Interdependence. So at its heart, the project critiques the centrality of the individual in Western society as the fundamental building block of the systems we inhabit. It looks particularly at how social media and human-computer interfaces reinforce this worldview. And the body of work that I've been kind of making alongside it provides alternative models of interaction that are group-centered rather than user-centered, and kind of probes and prototypes that emphasize or obscure these new kind of representations of self. So over the course of the next 20 minutes exactly, I hope, I want to kind of set out this sort of conceptual landscape for my argument and identify the ways I kind of see that worked out, and then show kind of practically how I've been exploring some sort of tactical responses through making. So to kind of start on this landscape, modern philosophy during the Enlightenment really sought to distinguish the individual from society. This kind of new freedom to determine one's own future, one's own beliefs, brought about a liberation from these existing kind of social categories, so those imposed by religion or by class. And these ideas have evolved to the point now where the individual is kind of embedded unquestioningly as the fundamental component, or that like node level building block of so many of the systems we inhabit, whether they be nations or networks or interfaces. And these ideas really like grew particularly strongly wherever they aligned with emerging economic systems. Capitalism requires a particular kind of possessive individualism, by which we view everything around us primarily as actual or potential commercial property. So as we see these kind of ideas growing together, we see this shift from the individual as citizen to the individual as consumer. So if we kind of, I guess, fast forward from then, and we take this kind of modern post-Enlightenment possessive individualism, it kind of, I guess, in a way climaxes, finds kind of a home, at least economically, in neoliberal economic policies, which we start to see in the 70s and 80s. Neoliberalism understands individual economic freedom as kind of the central, the non-negotiable. By reducing government interference in economy, it paves the way for the individual to sustain themselves, to kind of prosper in the marketplace. So overall, we see this movement from thinking about the individual as a means of like escaping hierarchy and social division, empowering the individual with a new freedom, but then these same ideas are kind of extracted and optimized to fuel a new economic system of power. And I argue that there's kind of like a similar and related history in the emergence of the internet and surrounding technologies. The network, this great new idea with its decentralized format, was to usher in a kind of like a post-hierarchical era, this great distributed egalitarian ideal. But instead, the contemporary internet is kind of more of an ideological sort of Frankenstein. It's this potential of like globally connected collectivism, but it's awkwardly fused with a kind of neoliberal individualism. So one could argue that we're more interconnected than ever before, but how I understand it is that our interactions and experiences of those connections are so discretely individual. They're radically tailored and meticulously kind of bespoke and customized to the person. So we have this kind of weird fusion, this collectivism and individualism kind of working together and at odds with each other. And this is what I call networked interdivvidualism. And it places the individual at the center of a new economy of information, often under the label of social, where personal data and self-expression become currency, and we start applying market practices to social relations. So this move from the kind of hierarchical or centralized model to this ideal of the kind of distributed network kind of gets interrupted and ends up somewhere maybe in the middle, this kind of decentralized model of and in this model, the self or the citizen, the user, they're repositioned at the pivotal hub of their own customized version of the network. And their customized version overlaps and connects with other network instances, and providing every node with a perspective of connectedness that is centered around me, the individual user or citizen. And the kind of, I guess, the structure or the architecture, the systems through which we engage with the network prioritizes the individual at every single level. Our interactions and our connections as they move through all these layers kind of remain discrete, and it's only, to me it seems, it's only at one level, at this very kind of control point, that they become interconnected.
Hello, everyone. My name is Natale. I'm a master's student of the post-graduation course in contemporary culture studies at the Federal University of Mato Grosso in Brazil. I would like to thank Rabia for all the assistance you gave and for this event. Here I'm going to talk about DroneART, which is one of the 3 arms of an ongoing project that I'm working on with my teacher, Dolores Galindo, in Brazil. So what is DroneART? DroneART is a strategy of resistance, a way to criticize the use of military drones in conflicted areas. In the last couple of years, the controversial use of drones called the attention of artists of different nationalities and technical backgrounds. DroneART projects are about military power, illegality, immorality, unauthorized surveillance, disregard for borders, no official statement of armed conflicts, lack of justice to the families that were killed in these attacks, etc. It is about resistance, and it is done with different methods and forces its viewers to criticize the power of an empire that decides over life and death of citizens that are not inside US borders and that are of a different race and religion. We live in a moment less characterized by great wars. Instead, there are many small armed conflicts around the globe. The United States presents us its military technology through biopower actions. Conflicts grow behind badges, ideologies, religions, and races. It is increasingly difficult to understand the distinctions between legitimate violence, crime, and terrorism. If the legitimation of violence is not clear, it's not black or white, then all violence is within a range of gray colors that does not stop oppressing their populations. According to the US manual about drones called Eyes of the US Army Roadmap for Unmanned Aircraft Systems, in 1915, Nikola Tesla introduced the concept of unmanned flight, describing an armed aircraft designed to defend the United States. In 1919, Elmer Sperry, the creator of the autopilot technology, used an unmanned aircraft to sink a captured German ship as part of a demonstration of this new technology. In 1985, the Department of Defense purchased the Pioneer, which was the first drone that flew over 300 missions during Operation Desert Shield and Operation Desert Storm, hunting missiles and high-value targets. The learned operational lessons and needs with the global war on terror induced the armed forces to increase the power of unmanned aerial systems. Other countries are beginning to adopt this type of surveillance and defense systems. One of them is Brazil. According to a press release done February 5 this year, Embraer, the world's fourth biggest aircraft maker, will begin producing drones. To attack is necessary to own legitimacy. The United States tend to legitimize their attack actions as a defense response to the events of September 11. And according to Hart and Negri, military power can be legitimized when their function is to maintain order, but not necessarily peace, making possible to carry out legal, illegal, and immoral acts of violence as long as this violence results in the production and maintenance of imperial order. So DroneART brings a wide range of research projects that do not have an agenda in common. This emergent art brings an opportunity to examine social justice, democracy, and ethical issues, and also help us to observe the connections between art, culture, ideology, and power, and confront the emergent kinds of armed conflicts around the world.
Hi, my name is Rachel. I'm a graduate student from Parsons School of Design and Design and Technology. I graduated in May and my project was called Vortex. It's actually, the interesting thing is it's actually a two-part project. So Vortex is the proof of concept for a more theoretical project that I did called Mesh Tectonics. So a bit of background. When I started my thesis, I had so many ideas and I didn't know what to do with them. And my department was very particular in the fact that you have to produce a thesis project. Like, it's not a question. You have to produce something that can work. And then here I was, doing research, and then I was like on like network technology and Bogdanov and and Latour, and I was like, how do I reconcile the fact that I still need to produce something by a deadline, and also I still wanted to be able to do this kind of philosophical research. So what I did was I split my project into two. So Vortex is actually the proof of concept. It's the working project. It's a prototype, but it's not really a prototype. It's more like at this point, it's more like an alpha release because it's been used by 500 people and it's been tested. And then Mesh Tectonics, which was the research behind how and why this project came about, became a book which I funded on Kickstarter. The origins of the project was like this. So Mesh Tectonics comes from two words. Mesh, which is the word network, and it also means like a hook. And I was also doing research on mesh networks, which are networks that are not structurally inclined to like spine. So normal networks, for instance, AT&T and Verizon, all use a backbone, which is like that deep fiber C infrastructure cable, which connects from tower to tower. Mesh networks are more like wheels in which there is one pipe in the middle, and then like a spoke, it goes into different places. One of my friends was working with Brooklyn Wi-Fi, and we were both doing it together. And from then on, I was like, is it possible for us to rethink of how networks are to be? Because we talk about digital history, we talk about media studies, we talk about digital humanities, and what does it all mean? Like, what do all these catchwords mean? Like, why not we start at fundamental things like, where does a network start? Where does a network stop? What is the size of a network?
Actually, I have one. I'll start with one for John. We were talking about this earlier as well, but I was wondering how you see the products that you design I want to know what you think of them as how do they function in the real world, or what do you see them? Where is the space for their use, perhaps?
Great question. I guess as a starting point for me, they were like a lot of the investigations were kind of primarily conversation starters or kind of provocations to engage people at a starting point in this kind of conversation. I think it's interesting, I guess, because inside the design discipline, you are always thinking of like, what is this like when the person themselves, when I actually put this in front of an audience, prototype it or see people use it, and then kind of like reflect back on that again. And it was interesting to see, for me anyway, trying to design things with a different set of assumptions. You see people kind of coming up against those assumptions themselves, and kind of to give an example, that there was a piece of software that would shut your computer down if there was more than one person. One of the guys who was using it, and he had this idea of like printing his face out and cutting it out and kind of holding it up against him. So you could kind of see him coming up against the shortcomings of the system and kind of like hacking it to a certain extent. Or there was someone who approached one of the other devices and was able to kind of contort themselves to unlock it themselves. And I think I guess it kind of harks back to my responding to the assumptions that are built into these systems as well, and that interesting way in which people kind of hack and kind of reappropriate, kind of have tactical responses to particular paths or systems that are ingrained in. So yeah, I don't know, I think as that would be an interesting area for me to kind of take further, is to see how you can, I don't know, somehow give people further ability to kind of make these things their own, if that makes any sense.
I actually have a question for Anna, and I was wondering if within your research project on this DroneART movement, if you do something like a qualitative evaluation of it or something like that, because I was wondering when you were talking about this American artist that has the scarf that it protects you from this kind of observation. And to me it's kind of, I mean, ironic that it's produced in the US, that it's $450, and that it's sold to people who, well, for now, actually don't need already that kind of protection, but that the people who actually should use it, can't, because it's not available and it would be way too expensive. So I was wondering if you make some evaluation within, like, on the art you're examining within this project.
Yes, it is inevitable to look at this point too. At first, I guess that since it's in the art world, it's not really connected to the population, because yes, I think it's crazy because it's such a creative idea and we can actually need it. There might be a moment that we will need this kind of clothing, but the artist, there is no intention from him to make these clothings available for a cheaper price to another public. It's something that you can find at the new museum here in New York, and that's the only place they're selling. So it's just an expression of his work for now.
But isn't that kind of strange? It's like, it's this weird, I mean, I guess because I'm really, really practical and I like to see things that work, but and this is not pointed against the work that you do, like on DroneART, but for instance, the one about building membranes around buildings to keep them safe from drones. the cheaper and more logical solution, which have been used for the last few years, is to just build underground.
But it doesn't, I don't believe that these projects, even the drone scarf or the membrane project, are meant to actually happen. I think there is a political question in it. If you have this intention, yes, you are an architect, you do have the knowledge to build a building, a house that can protect you from surveillance. But I don't think it is just about that. At least I believe, since I'm an artist and I know other artists, that you have to question the politics of power when you create art. I mean, that's what many artistic movements are about. Questioning what is oppressing you. So that's why I think there's this huge importance in this work. Just like the drone scarf, or other projects from the same artist that did the drone scarf, that he created a little purse for celebrities that they could use that would protect them from cameras, and actually worked. So it's not that the celebrities are going to use them, but it's questioning the power media has over them. You know, that's the importance, I think, of this study about drone art.
I mean, there's an underlying sort of politics in all of your presentations that sort of comes through, and is essentially what I felt tied everything together. Because I feel like, I don't know, in some ways you're all sort of addressing the same problem. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how you felt that when in viewing each other's presentations, did you sort of, what kind of connections you might have drawn from each other, or where you see your own interest in what you're addressing, the identity of yourself, the internet, what happens to it, how to use various methods of like camouflage or resistance. I guess I'm wondering where like you see your project starting from, and how do you see it? What is it in response of, essentially? Because I do think that drone art is, and I feel like a lot of yours is the same thing. It's sort of what happens to the identity on the internet, and how do you sort of work around that, the problems that come with identification.
I guess for me, like, because my premise for doing the project was personal, it was only later that people wanted to turn it, so I got approached later, like people wanted to turn it into a product, and I am in the process of working together with someone else to create a startup. So for me, like, startup is the new performance art, simply because like that's the only way you can really reach people. And for me, it was all about accessibility. I was interested in like joining the art world for a while, like I-beam and everything, but like for me, like, what is the point of living in this stratified world where like you're only exchanging questions but no action is being made? There's, yes, you are questioning, but also, your piece is like, it's only going to go to a select number of people. And it becomes even more pressing with the problem of capital and rentier class. Like, everybody knows that we don't live in capitalism anymore. If you really do, then like, we don't live in late capitalism or capitalism. We live in a rentier class where everybody borrows money from somebody else, or capital, in order to survive. Like, so that's the kind of like premise of the world that I'm working on. And if that is the case, then then the art role and the conventions of art no longer carry the same kind of mode of being. And so you have to find a different way or mode of being. And it might not be called art at this point. It might be called something else. It's just like, we might not have a middle class, but we have something else. And because we're kind of emerging through that something else, then we have to find a different way around it.
Can I ask Rachel of the Coptic practice that you talked about, and what could you please go into some detail? And
what practice?
Do you mean about Kickstarter?
You said something about a religion that you started.
Yeah. So the Kickstarter book was actually started as a religion. That was the idea behind it. Because something that I realized about the digital work, and I have new research on it called Data Mania, which is on something else, but like Is that, you know, how do people, if we, okay, let's hold on the premise that there's no difference between digital living and physical real life anymore. We're just all living in one living. Because the moment you get your job offer through email, there's no separation between digital and real. Everything is just real. And so if we're operating on that premise, my idea was that Kickstarter was basically a form of religion. So what are the tenets of religion?
What is Kickstarter?
Kickstarter is a crowdfunding platform. So people give you money, like they donate money, and then you have a goal, like say a certain amount of money.
People give you money. How? What is?
It's called crowdsourcing to fund a project. So rather than having like one producer, for example, if you were making a movie, rather than just having one executive producer, you make a little trailer and then send it out to everyone you might know online over the website, and then people contribute little amounts of money.
So that's a website that provides this.
It's a platform that allows people to give you money in exchange for a future return. It's alright. It's alright. Yeah.
I have a question, or I don't know, the start of a question, which is one thing that came up in all your presentations was, you know, this idea of sort of how you or your data is cloaked, or how you might sort of appear, how your data appears in drag in these different areas online, to data mining searches or to others or to people you're working with. And I was sort of struck, John, in your presentation by when you were referring to the individual, you sort of did user/citizen. And I guess I'm wondering about sort of how you all see the role of looking and of seeing, you know, in a really basic way at the moment. So there's a sort of way of seeing things or not seeing them in terms of the DroneART, like being cloaked or cloaking your data, but then also a way of seeing ourselves and a sort of interchangeability that could perhaps with a keystroke switch from user to citizen. But what is that difference? And I mean, I guess I saw the potential in all of your projects as first and foremost being able to more accurately see what we're looking at in order to then deal with it. I mean, it reminds me of that line in Starship Troopers where the new chief of the army says, in order to destroy the bugs, we have to understand them. So it's like you have this sort of thing first, we have to see it better. But then I started to wonder, are we seeing it better, or are some of these like visualizations like distractions in a way? Sort of mappings and remappings of data to what end, in a sense?
Flusser says that all images are magical. So if we operate on the idea that images are magical, then it almost doesn't matter which spectacle you're working on, as long as the magical image has the power to change itself. It's a kind of transformative tool. So,
well, I guess I'm wondering a little bit about, I just feel like there's a real sort of fluidity or interchangeability, maybe even at times like what's become a sort of entrenched laziness around like user/individual or like receiver or network, or like what do we, I don't know, like the men.
I wonder in a way, like part of it for me is that, I don't know, in a way technology kind of now more than ever allows anyone to kind of become involved and to start, I can put up a computer and start to figure out how these things are made. I can, buy a drone on Amazon and start flying it. So there's this level of, I feel like I can access and start to unpack this space, but then there's also at the same time a kind of a disempowerment. Like these things are abstract. They are very, in a way they are us and they represent us, but in a way they're very not of us. And I think it's very difficult and complex to try and piece that apart. So I don't know, there's those, for me anyway, there's those two things in the kind of technology space. There's this kind of drawing in, this ease of access, but there's also this complexity and this otherness, which I think is maybe a small part of what makes that so difficult to just simply visualize, or just to kind of pull out and say, aha, here it is. You know?
I mean, there's a level of, and in all three of the projects, there's a playfulness, which is sort of dark in the sense that you're left with maybe no other way of addressing it than just sort of make a game out of it, and then maybe try to understand what the rules are, and is that the only way to address the problem? Or I guess for me it's just sort of very interesting that each of the subjects is pretty dark, but the only way we feel like we can connect with it is by sort of like making it into this playful thing. And I don't know where the question in that is, but I think that is itself maybe a question as to why do we feel that need to be, or why do we think that that's the only way in which we can address it. And I was just sort of at the top of my head when looking at all of your presentations, just sort of state that way, that essentially what we're looking at is not as playful, but why do we feel that maybe that's the only way we can address it? Like, is there a hesitance in looking at it another way? I don't know.
Because you brought up the point at one point, this question, like, is beauty a valid form of resistance? That it was one of the artists who were...
No, I was questioning when I saw, because I understand, I like the phrase you use about Star Troopers, because yes, like, to know your enemy, you need to understand more about them. But what if we are in some way becoming them? So how can we analyze that? So at first, when I was looking at Maoist She Still Works, I just fell in love with it. I said, wow, this is amazing. And then I took some moments, actually some weeks, and then I came back and looked at it again and said, it's not as brilliant as I thought. Why? What is really making me dislike this work that at first I fell in love with? And then I realized it was the lack of resistance. There was no resistance. And it was crazy to see that, because she is from Pakistan. So how come? What is her objective as an artist?
Although, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to speak to that, because I think, what I'm seeing in all of your presentations is there's this question about the economy of energy, that, if you're spending all of this time trying to subvert the system, then is there not something there that you really have to question in terms of where your energy and your drive is going towards? And in a work like the painting, it's actually going into a completely different platform, or a completely different sphere. It's not just going back into the system in a way. And that's actually where I think the strength of that work is. That's where I think that work becomes the most resistant in some ways, because it's actually stepping outside of the frame. So
yeah, my comment actually was somewhat related to that, what I was thinking, which was, I had a really different read of it, not that it was beautiful or something like that, but that it used like a vernacular form of documentation, in this case painting, to talk about something outside of that sphere. I mean, I think it's related to this comment, but I saw it as strong because it took a very contemporary subject and then treated it in a very traditional, I mean, I couldn't see that slide that well, but it looked like it was in the form of traditional, like...
Yes,
sort of
she
local
used
painting.
the painting that they do in trucks.
Right.
So it's the same kind of painting, and then she added it on the drones. And at first I said, well, I guess it gave me the feeling that drones are becoming as common as trucks. And I said, well, that's also interesting about this. But
I think also as a form of, I mean, back to this other idea of like how we look at these things and how we portray them, and then like all the stuff that came up in the presentations are exceedingly hard to see, right? There's sort of nothing to see, hence all the visualizations, which I, again, sort of do wonder about as a type of distraction. But this is like a very old and historically entrenched way of seeing that has a whole history in painting. And so I think to bring a subject into that offers like a potential zone of thinking about it that might be different than that of sort of analogy or metaphor. I mean, it's very old-fashioned, just representational.